It seems that Bible prophecy is one thing that's been on my mind, and for the last few weeks we haven't discussed very much of Bible prophecy. But I feel that it's urgent that we get back into Bible prophecy because things are developing that we all need to know about. And I feel there's an urgency that I think I'm going to start bringing into the radio programs as time goes on. Because I see the things in the book of Revelation happening faster all the time. And of course, once you lay a groundwork, then suddenly you can move with that groundwork more rapidly as acceptance takes place. But in Revelation chapter 13, this is referring to the beast of the end time system. And in verse 4, it talks about a war apparatus, that no one on earth can make war with this particular beast power. And so it's going to have a military front. And then in verse 7, it talks about he was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. So this has to do with our religious beliefs, Jesus Christ, and we're saints of Christ. Therefore, if he's going to be the false Messiah, he's going to make war against us and try to blot our name out, or the name of Christ out. And it also says that he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. So this shows a political world government, because it says all tribes, languages. There is none exclusive, not even the United States of America. And yet we as a Christian nation sometimes feel that we are going to be exempt from this beast system. Well, we're not. But then down in verse 16 and 17, it not only has the political, the militarily, but I guess we should read verse 8 first. And it says, all inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, whose names are not written in the book of life. So it's also going to have a religious front. And it's going to have a world religion, and everyone will have to worship the beast as the Messiah, the Savior of the world, instead of Jesus Christ. Then down in verse 16 and 17, and this is the dreaded mark of the beast discussed, which most people do not even want to talk about. They don't want to think about it. And that's why this rapture theory is so popular, because people don't want to think that they're going to have to be confronted with this particular situation of either refusing the marks in the right hand or forehead, or martyrdom, starvation, or whatever, unless there is supernatural intervention on God's behalf for us. I believe there will be. In the book of Revelation chapter 7, it talks about 144,000 who were sealed in the forehead. So whether the sealing is strictly for the purpose of protection through this beast system, I'm not positive yet, or whether it's simply because we are the ones who follow the Lamb, and I say we because I feel that we're a part of it, because we're trying to follow Jesus Christ wherever he goes. No matter what he teaches us and shows us, we're willing to obey it. But anyway, this economic system in verse 16 and 17, where it will be a marking system, is going to have such total control that they'll know every move you make. Because let's face it, if you even buy a piece of bubble gum and you have to transfer funds from your account to the store's account, they know that transaction. If you can't even buy a newspaper without the instant transfer of funds, they know that transaction. So they're going to have total, complete control over everything we do. So I'm going to start with a series on dismantling America for world government and show how they're infiltrating the United States and what steps they've been taking for years preparing the United States to be merged into a one-world socialist communist dictatorship known as the Beast. And in order to introduce this, the reason why I feel it's so urgent, I'm going to read from 4 different articles to start with, and then go in as an introduction into the sermon. From the Daily Express, Paso Robles, California, Tuesday, May 3rd, 1983. It reads like this, in part. Paying the mortgage, department store, and other bills will be as easy as picking up a telephone next month for Security Pacific National Bank checking account customers, the bank has announced. While the service set to begin June 1st, this is 1983, for the bank's 1.9 million checking customers, it may save a trip or two to the post office. It'll cost $4 a month for unlimited service, equal to 20 postage stamps. The bank official in charge of the effort, Shirley Gonzalez, said people who use the service will become the base of the Los Angeles-based bank's future home banking efforts, in which customers will use computer terminals to transfer funds to creditors. This is today. This starts in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, June 1st. And they want to be on the leading edge, they say in this article, so that they'll be sure to be ahead and one of the leaders in the field of economics and the wave of the future. So they say that this will save a great deal of money by instant transfer of funds, and they'll send just one single statement showing each transfer you've made at the end of the month, sort of like a checking account statement. But this now is reality starting June 1st. But there's another article. Citibank tells poor to use machines. And this is from the New York Times News Service. Anyone who has less than $5,000 in a bank account will be forced from now on to use automated teller units. You can't go up to a counter and transact business with a human being. You have to have a card and transact business with a card. And this is starting right now. Citibank happens to be the second largest bank in the United States and one of the largest in the world. And it'll start out, they have 280 branches in the greater New York area. And so all 280 branches, everybody who has $5,000 or less will be forced to start using automated tellers for the instant transfer of funds. This starts this year. But then there's another article. Many of you have probably read Sylvia Porter. She has a column that goes all over the United States, and it says, "What the credit card industry is doing to make fraud tougher." It's late April 1983. Do you know where your credit cards are? Playing on the theme of do you know where your children are? Trying to cut down on juvenile delinquency late at night. Credit card crimes are surging, with estimated losses this year alone topping $200 million. Roughly 7 credit cards exist for every single person in this nation, a statistic that merely hints at the size of the problem. For the potential for fraud, theft, and other mischief increases as the number of the cards we carry mounts. Most spectacular among the credit card crimes is a skyrocketing volume of counterfeiting and altering cards. Now remember, all the way through, since we've been looking at this instant transfer of funds, the number one thing that they're using in order to move us into this instant transfer of funds and the laser beam markings on the right hand and forehead and becoming a walking credit card ourselves, or a debit card, is counterfeiting. Eliminate fraud. And that's the number one concern that they show. In 1977, industry losses due to counterfeiting bank cards were calculated at $66,000. Since then, the total has shot up astronomically. $3.5 million in 1980, $15 million in 1981, and $40 million in 1982. MasterCard estimates its losses from counterfeiting hit $8.5 million in 82. Visas were $10 million in 82. All segments of the industry are now examining their practices and making changes to fight the staggering threat. So this is the excuse used for going into the instant transfer of funds, which we'll see in just a minute. The American Bankers Association put together a task force in 1982 to study the issue, and its findings are due at the end of this month of May. The task force is drawing up guidelines for banks, customers, and merchants. Says John Alexander, chairman of the group and senior vice president at Bank One in Columbus, Ohio. The task force is identifying existing safeguards and working on new cost-effective and efficient ways to make cards safer and more tamper-proof. Now, we're going to get down into just a little of what they're doing, and the last one is going to be very, very interesting. Legislative action is being considered to plug perceived gaps in existing laws and to clarify some of the crimes, such as using valid account numbers for fraudulent purposes. So they're trying to eliminate taking one of your credit cards and the good number and then using it as fraud. And then who has to pay? Well, the legislation has said that we only have to pay $50. That's all we're liable for if somebody steals our credit cards. The banks take the rest of the loss. So that's why it's such a staggering figure now. For Visa, $10 million just last year. The credit card companies and the American Bank Association will decide what remedies to suggest and possibly will draft some legislation soon. One goal is to focus the attention of Congress. Now remember, Congress is the one who has been passing laws for 60 years now to socialize this country. Socialize it. That's why they're trying to focus attention on Congress to enforce or enact laws and other agencies on the scope of this problem. But the card companies aren't waiting to introduce changes. Some cards have been found easy to tamper with and counterfeit. American Express, although it has reported few problems with counterfeiting because of the particular shade of green used and the complicated background of its cards, so they have little lines and different designs in the background that's hard to counterfeit. It's introducing another feature to discourage counterfeiters. And printed on the back of all cards from now on will be the cardholder's number. The same one is embossed on the front. So you have a number on the back and the front, and that'll make it doubly hard to duplicate. Then it goes on and tells some others, but I want to get down to the main one. Visa soon will introduce its Electron Visa card, which will have no embossed numbers on it at all. It'll have no numbers embossed on it. Now look what they're doing. Instead, the number will be encoded in a universal product code. What does the Bible say? No man can buy or sell unless he receives the mark. And the mark, Greek word, is charagma. Scratches, etchings, stamps, or sculptures in the right hand or the forehead. And actually the root word charagma comes from another Greek word that means as inked. So it's like you would use ink, an ink pen, and write. And so what is a laser beam marking, or even markings on all these cards other than ink and so on? Markings. And so it's exactly what has taken place. Such as those found on virtually all products. So they'll be using the same universal product codes that we see in grocery stores. It'll be on a magnetic strip and will be readable by an optical character recognition machine. The first use of the card to be tried out in the next several months will be at automated teller machines, once again eliminating human beings. Now this is only the beginning. These are from secular sources, newspapers. It has no religious connotation whatsoever to it. So it makes sense to me that if Bible prophecy is going to happen the way it says, this must be jumping right off the pages into our eyes. So we should be able to see it. Here's another financial, common sense economics it's called. And I want to read this. It's very interesting. The title, New Money, Financial Armageddon. This is non-religious, not a religious word in it. And yet listen to what it says. I'll skip the first column. Every bank transaction in America goes through the computer at Culpeper, Virginia. This is an underground federal computer terminal and station which is totally underground. Now this place is where it's self-sufficient, where officials of the government, in case of a nuclear attack, can go in to this Culpeper underground station and they will survive, and the rest of us will be killed. Now this is where this terminal is. Through an organization called Society of the Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication System, that's SWIFT, there is a satellite communication connection with another switching station in Brussels, Belgium, and another large computer in Luxembourg, which has the ability to assign every person on the face of the earth a bank account number. Electronic fund transfer has also been introduced, offering an alternative to the use of currency and coin. Computer terminals have been set up by banks all over the United States. Soon it'll be easy to withdraw your money from your account no matter where you are in the world. Terminals are being set up in grocery stores, and cash registers will soon be able to withdraw from your account without handling any cash. This is simple economics from an economic book. They know what's going on, the trends of the world. It's not based on Revelation chapter 13, and yet we can look at it and see that it is happening right now. So what I want to do is start a series, and it won't be every single week, but it will be every other week, probably, on Bible prophecy to show us how far the United States has already been merged into a one-world socialist communist dictatorship. The Supreme Court of the United States in 1892 declared that this country was a Christian nation. It had previously, on our coins and so on, it says, one nation under God. So we, without doubt, declared that we are a Christian nation. But the United States is the only nation that's ever done that. The only one that has declared itself by the lawmaking agencies, the highest lawmaking agencies, the courts, that it was a Christian nation. But something has gone wrong, and we all know it. Everybody in this country, anybody you talk to, I'll talk to people in business that I do business with. Everybody knows something is wrong, but they can't lay their finger on it. They just can't do it. There's something in the air. No one feels secure So everyone knows that our once totally free and sovereign individuality is and has been disappearing rapidly in the last 50 years, and more so than ever in the last 20 years. But why and how is it happening? I want to give a quote by John F. Kennedy, and he gave this at Columbia University 10 days later. After he made this statement, he was a dead man. 10 days later, and I quote, he made this in front of the student body. "The high office of president has been used to foment a plot to destroy the American people. And before I leave office, I must inform the citizen of his plight." 10 days later, he was dead. He didn't have opportunity one to breathe a word of the plight of the American citizen. The prophet Daniel wanted to know when the end of man's age would be concluded. He'd been receiving prophecy after prophecy and writing it down. And his mind must have been spinning. I can just understand, after receiving prophecy after prophecy, and all of these things which he didn't understand, and he wanted to know. And the time setting is given in Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 to 3. I'll read it from the New International Version. "At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress such as not has happened from the beginning of the nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered." Now, when you compare that with Revelation 13, verse 7, it's the exact phraseology. Because everyone is going to worship the beast whose name has not been written in the book of life. Exactly the same thing. Everyone whose name is not found written in the book. Verse 2, "Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake. Some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt." So this shows the time setting is the return of Jesus Christ and the resurrection from the dead. Verse 3, "Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens." Hopefully that's going to be us. Wise unto salvation. "And those who lead many to righteousness," convert people to Jesus Christ. Hopefully that's what we're doing. "Will shine like the stars forever and ever." So it'll be a time of trouble leading directly into the time of the resurrection of the dead. And it's further identified in verse 4. I think we should read that too. "But you, Daniel, close up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end." So this book has been sealed until the time of the end. "Many will go here and there, and increase in knowledge will explode off the everywhere." And that's exactly what's happening. Now I want to read it from the King James Version. "But you, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book." Nobody can understand it, even to the time of the end. But when the end comes, Christ will unseal the book, and we can understand it. "Many shall run to and fro." That's easily accessible world travel. "And knowledge shall be increased." There are estimates that knowledge is doubling every 10 years. Some are even saying every 5 years now because of the computer systems. And I read just 2 days ago where some are even saying every 2.5 years to 3 years that is now doubling. So that is fantastic knowledge. It is happening so fast that people can't keep up with it. So this truly is the time setting in which God says that the book of Daniel, and the book of Daniel corresponds to the book of Revelation. So it's Jesus Christ stripping the seals in the book of Revelation that opens up the understanding to the book of Daniel. So we can begin to understand what is prophesied, and I think it's our time today. Verse 7 of Daniel 12 goes on to show a time period. It talks about a time, times, and a half of times. So that's 3.5 times. And then it says, "And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people," and there is only one people on the face of the earth that's ever declared themselves a Christian nation, the United States of America, and there has been no other. And I can't help but wonder, since Christians are God's chosen holy people today, and nobody else, I can't help but wonder if this nation is not who this is referring to. However, now I wanted to bring out one other possibility that's very strong. While this may be referring to the same time frame as Revelation 11, verse 2, and I'll read it, just a part of it. "For it," referring to the temple and Jerusalem, "is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. 42 months is 3.5 years. Okay? And the same time setting in Daniel 12, verse 7 is 3.5 times, which is 3.5 years. That could refer to the same time period. But it doesn't matter, because as far as I am concerned, I'm not going to teach this who is going to be scattered. That's not what I'm doing. That's not why I referred to the Scripture. I just referred to it that because there is going to be a scattering of someone. So I'm going to use that little phrase and say, okay, I want to show what's happening to the United States of America, because this is where we live, and we were declared by the Supreme Court a Christian nation. And we're the only totally free nation left in the world. So we'll use this phrase in reference to the United States and show how the socialist communists of the world are creating a one-world government. And speaking of the final world social system, Revelation 13, verse 7, the last part, I've already read it, says, "And power was given to him over all kindreds, tongues, and nations." But how is it happening? How are they literally weakening our country, and everybody knows something is wrong, and then going to merge it into this beast system? Okay, step number one that they're using is they're literally altering the constitutional republic which our forefathers gave us. They're changing it to a democracy. So I want to describe what a democracy is and a constitution is so that we can see the difference. And then suddenly it'll begin to start making sense how they're destroying this country and preparing us. Thomas Jefferson, in his first inaugural address, I want to quote what he had to say. "Still one more thing, fellow citizens, a wise and frugal government," and that's what we have in the United States, "which shall restrain men from injuring one another." So he's saying, okay, here is a government, and if it's a wise and a good government, and it's going to keep men from harming one another, here's what's going to have to happen. "It shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned." So when we hold a job or we run a business and we go out and we earn money, that government, if it's good, it will not take away through taxation, heavy taxation, that which you have earned, because you are a productive person, and if they're stealing what you have produced, then you're going to quit producing. This is the sum of good government. So there's been a revolution that's been going on, and it's been very silent, and most of us didn't even know it was going on. But it's been going on since the mid-1850s. The United States was formed as a constitutional republic which restricted the government's intrusion into every single one of our lives. By law, the Constitution forbids the government of the United States from having any effect or control of your life whatsoever. But the individual was sovereign, and he stood as king in his own domain at that time when the Constitution was formed. The government, according to the Constitution, had no rights whatsoever, except those few delegated by the Constitution to maintain a workable government. The silent revolution that's been going on since the mid-1800s has been stripping away, little by little, very quietly, the constitutional republic which our forefathers established, and in its place has been substituting democracy. Now, most people have been brainwashed through our government-controlled schools, not our public schools, which belong to the citizens of the United States. That is not true anymore. The public schools do not belong to us anymore. They are now government-controlled schools. And we've been brainwashed through the literature that they produce and force us to teach in our schools to believe that a democracy is a wonderful form of government. And they present reason after reason. It's endless, their string of reasons for a democracy. But history bears out, and you can go into the history books and look at the form of government of every nation that's ever existed, and you'll find out that every experiment in democracy has been a complete and utter failure. Not one has ever succeeded. Democracy never has worked, and it never will. It can't. It has built within itself destruction, and I'll explain. As former President Kennedy said, there is a plot to destroy America. Those who are working this plot in our schools are re-educating the people to believe that democracy is good. These people are called change agents. They formed what's called the National Education Association many, many years ago for the very purpose of controlling the educational systems of America and passing laws and lobbying in Congress to pass laws to restructure the educational system of America so that they could teach democracy. And that democracy was the type of government that we really have instead of a constitutional republic which protects us against government. Thomas Paine was one of the great inspirations behind the original American Revolution. And he warned that a democracy was the vilest form of government possible. James Madison was the father of the Constitution. Many of you may remember that if it's still in textbooks today. He warned that if we changed the constitutional republic, which protected us from government, to a democracy, that we would lose all property rights and end up with contention and chaos. The reason we've not been told of these particular dangers, is that those who planned this change from a form of government that we had are really communist, socialist, and they're called liberals in the Congress of the United States. But in order to change our government, the revolutionaries have to create a state of chaos and anarchy to so disenchant our people that we'll willingly accept their form of government as the only solution for chaos and anarchy. So the question is this illegal democracy that is now superseding our constitutional republic creating chaos and contention and the feeling of hopelessness that it's designed to achieve? Yes, it is. Everywhere you look, everybody knows something is wrong, but they just can't place a finger on it. So let's examine how a democracy works to understand why the plotters for world government are so eager to change our constitutional republic into a democracy. A democracy is majority rule. Now that seems fine until you began to go under, say, that first statement, majority rule. And you begin to realize that the majority of our voters become tax consumers. They take government jobs, and other people work to pay taxes to support them. And suddenly, government becomes very big. And the few people who are left are the actual taxpayers. So a democracy becomes a nation of wealth users rather than wealth producers. And you can begin to see just from right there what's happening in America. Labor unions, which are totally socialist and communist dominated, will not let people produce wealth. They won't do it. The majority vote themselves benefits from the public treasury, and yet they add nothing to it. They receive income from it, but they never pay taxes to help support that democracy. The majority who become welfare recipients write and pass laws that rob the hard-working, productive citizens of their wealth. So the higher income you go into, the more taxes you have to pay for those who produce nothing. And so eventually, anyone who produces is going to lose heart and not produce. When all the productive citizens quit producing, you have total anarchy and chaos, and there is no longer any goods and services available. Destruction is built into a democracy from its foundations. So what it amounts to is the unproductive can share the wealth of the productive. And that's what the constitutional republic, which we were founded upon, was designed to protect us from. If you produce, you create wealth, you keep that wealth. You don't have to share it with someone who will not produce. So just ask yourself now, as just a common sense person, if you were to produce large wages and yet other people who would not produce pass laws, would you continue to take that wealth from you? Would you continue to produce? I wouldn't. I wouldn't at all. I've become very discouraged. So for at least the last half century, the United States citizens have been elected politicians who have promised everything. The Great Society by Lyndon Johnson, and before that, who did we have? Roosevelt, who was going to bring us a chicken in every pot, and we were going to become the greatest nation on earth. And yet, when you have this great society, you have to spend excessive amounts of money through taxation. This means deficit spending, which leads directly into bankruptcy. And what do we have today in our government? We have over $1 trillion debt, and we haven't had a balanced budget since the 50s. This begins to explain the difference in a democracy and a constitutional republic. So this welfare state, which is falsely called a democracy, takes extravagant amounts of money in order to run it. The problem of the need of a huge sum of money in order to support this type of a system seemingly was solved in 1913 when the politicians wrote a law and said a piece of paper called a Federal Reserve note is suddenly wealth. And yet you can take that piece of paper to any bank right now. You can't get gold for it, you can't get silver for it, you can't get land for it. It's worth nothing if you try to redeem it. At one time, according to the Constitution of the United States, all money had to be coined by the Congress. And that's in the Constitution. It could only be backed by silver, and it had to have a certain amount of grams of silver in it in order to be legal tender in this country. And therefore, it was wealth. When you had money, it was backed by real wealth. And you could go to a bank and turn in a silver certificate and get silver for it. Your wealth was not stripped away from you. But today, you have a piece of paper. And I've done this. Go to a bank and try to redeem it. They'll give you nothing for it. It's not worth anything. Unless you go out and give it to somebody and they're willing to give you a piece of their goods for it. It is worth nothing. So the national debt, suddenly because so many people are drawing from the public treasury, but not enough people are paying taxes to support that outrageous amount of excessive spending, so the national debt becomes a monster. And suddenly we have to pay interest because we have to borrow money to keep supplying payrolls to people who are not producing in free private enterprise to pay taxes. So suddenly, interest becomes the major cost of government. And what is it today? The national debt of the United States is over $1 trillion, and every dime of it is interest. We pay over $9 billion a year in interest alone on just our national debt. The following quotation is from Robert L. Preston's book, The Plot to Replace the Constitution, page 11. Today, every American is about to have his personal rights and freedoms swept away and to be reduced to a slave of the state. All of this will happen soon as the result of a vicious plot by one of the nation's most prestigious and wealthy organizations to replace the United States Constitution. This will bring about one of the greatest tragedies in the history of mankind, with rioting, murder, famine, fire, plunder, and pestilence sweeping America. Then I'll read from page 19. Now, all that needs to be done to totally destroy this once great and proud nation is to have the super rich manipulators who control the Federal Reserve System push the discount interest rate up. And what did it go to last year? 21%. And what are we in? A recession, and for those who are out of work, a depression, over 10% unemployment. In the state of Ohio, 1% of all homes that had a loan on it were repossessed last year. A lot of people out on the street. And the nation will be on its economic knees. There will be little or no money in circulation. Now, how does that happen? Okay, they said we have to push the interest rate up in order to fight inflation. But it did exactly the opposite. It fuels inflation, because if you've got $100 and you go to the bank and borrow $100, at 4% interest, you only pay back $104, don't you? But if it's at 21%, you got to pay back $121. That's $17 more of inflation. They did the exact opposite for the purpose of destroying all savings and loans in this country and small privately owned banks to merge them into a huge national bank. That's exactly what is happening. And he says so in his book. There will be little or no money in circulation. The interest rates went so high that nobody could go out and make a loan anymore. No new cars were being built and sold except for those who had the cash. So what happened? When you and I go out and borrow money on a home or a car, and suddenly the interest rate's so high, nobody can go out and borrow new money. So what are we doing? We're paying back, say, the $100 a year plus the interest of 20%. We're paying back $120 back into the banks, but nobody borrows more money, so no more money comes out into circulation. All the money goes back into the banks. And so there's no money for industry to expand, for new jobs. So there's layoffs. So here, when these super rich money manipulators push interest rates up, there comes a depression. All it's doing is transferring wealth from you and me, the citizens, to them. That's all it's doing. So they're amassing all the wealth in this once great country by the use of interest. Now I'll go on with this quote. Foreclosures will be high, and in the state of Ohio it was 1% last year. Loans will be called. Businesses will close. And didn't that happen when the interest rates went up? Business didn't expand and do better. It did the exact opposite. The unemployment rate will skyrocket. Food will disappear from the stores in the cities. People will starve. Riots will break out. Now, we haven't reached this point yet, but everything leading up to that point has been happening. Suddenly the nation will be in the midst of the worst national crisis it's ever faced. Meanwhile, the Congress and the executive branch will seem to fall into deadlock confusion. Why? Because those who are in our Congress call themselves liberals are nothing but the enemies of the United States. They're socialist communists. They're the ones perpetrating this. So they're not going to solve the problem because they want the problem to bring us to our knees. Nothing will seem to work. The situation will grow more grave, and the American people, more desperate by the hour, will cry out, "Help us! Oh, please help us! My baby is dying because of the lack of food." Everywhere the cry will go up for help. The news media will paint the most bleak and heart-rending scenes anyone has ever witnessed. End of quote. This is what they have planned for us, and it's going to happen. From the book Born Again Republic by Mr. M.J. Beckman, who was a governor, I think, of Wyoming, page 14, I want to read this quote in referring to the welfare state or a democracy in comparison to a constitutional republic. The people become more dependent upon government handouts and keep voting themselves more goodies. This is in a democracy where the majority rules. The printing press must work overtime. You see, it's printing more money because there's not enough to support everybody. The hard-working, wealth-producing minority becomes smaller and smaller because the tax-consuming majority write laws which plunder the wealth working people produce. Goods and services are not produced if the wealth they represent are plundered by laws that the non-producing majority are passing. If goods are not produced, they become scarce. When they become scarce, you'll find the price goes up, and that's inflation. A democracy will destroy itself every time because the majority will become parasitic, the free lunch syndrome. The system finally collapses when the wealth-producing majority finally quit producing wealth. Then you have chaos. And that's exactly what President John F. Kennedy was going to warn against, the plot that the high office of the presidency was being used to destroy the American people. But what about the constitutional republic that our founding fathers left us? We need to understand just a little about it so that we can compare and see how they are literally destroying us. How does it work, and why is it important for the plotters of this world government to destroy our constitutional republic? When our founding fathers wrote the United States Constitution, it was a law to govern the estate that they left after their death. The government was to administer the estate left behind by our forefathers. All right, we're the guardians of this land. The only lawful government in America is the constitutional republic that was left by our forefathers and that they passed and framed all the way back in Philadelphia in 1889 and 1876, or 1776 and 1789. The founding fathers created our government and wrote the Constitution to protect the citizens, you and me, from government. Our Constitution was to protect its citizens by law from the government. The law of the land protected us. The government had no control over us. Man's worst enemy has always been government. And our constitutional republic was designed to bind the government with the chains of our Constitution. And our founding fathers had previously lived under tyranny in Europe, where there were dictatorships. And they knew that you could not trust any government whatsoever. None. So our Constitution is now being dismantled so the citizens cannot be protected any longer from government. I'll just give one quick example of that. Such a government agency such as the Internal Revenue Service actually terrorizes our citizens. And they actually have their own courts which you have to appear before without a trial by jury, which is totally illegal according to the Constitution. If you are tried or if you are brought before any court For a $20 or more debt, you are guaranteed by the Constitution to have a trial by jury. And yet our government has been changed. And this is just one example. So the President, the Congress, and the judges in the courts are bound by law to protect our citizens from government because they have to take a loyalty oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. But now that our Constitution is being changed to a democracy, we're being oppressed more and more by the government that we're supposed to be protected from. So in our original constitutional republic, the individual was sovereign. He was king. In our original republic, the government was given no enforcement power of law. And this is something that is not taught in the schools anymore. But the original Constitution, the federal government was given no enforcement power of the law. In Article 3, Section 2, Clause 3 of the United States Constitution, it says that, and I quote, "The trial of all crimes except in cases of impeachment shall be by jury." All crimes, except if a congressman that we elect, we decide he's not doing the job, we can impeach him, and he doesn't have a chance before a jury. We just withdraw him by all the constituency impeaching him. Our forefathers didn't trust the government to try anyone or to even enforce their own criminal statutes. That's where the authority rests on you and me. We the people could check the abuses of power by government by finding someone not guilty in a court system and therefore nullify and make null and void a government-passed law. And yet we're not taught that anymore in our school systems. But this is rapidly changing, and our sovereignty as citizens are being dissolved and we're being oppressed. To show the power of the individual in our constitutional republic, a president, a federal judge, or even congressman can be impeached. But you and I, as a juror who votes not guilty, cannot be impeached. We can't even be prosecuted for that vote of not guilty. We can declare someone not guilty, 12 people on a jury, and one person says not guilty, and that law becomes null and void. That's the power you and I have in this country if we only knew it. Most of the people who live in the United States do not understand that the people, you and I, have the power to nullify law as a juror. In Matthew 24:42, Jesus made the statement that we should watch. And it means watch the world events that he had just preceding that, in the preceding part of the chapter, talked about. So in every case, through Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, Jesus said to watch world events. So that's why we wanted to take a look at the constitutional destruction that's taking place in America. But there is a second way in which those who are dismantling America and merging us into a world government, there's a second method that they're using to destroy this country and to take it over for a one-world, liberal, socialist, communist country. Nothing upsets liberals and left-wingers in the United States or even in the communist world more than equating socialism with communism. Ever since 1905, when the Intercollegiate Socialist Society was established, the social liberals have tried to give a tone of respectability to socialism, or to the term socialism. And in 1921, because of the term socialism, it was not accepted by the American people, and most of the American people were in panic because of international communism and when they saw the overthrow of the Russian government. So they had to change from the Intercollegiate Socialist Society to the name Intercollegiate Social. Well, no, wait a minute. They changed it from the Intercollegiate Socialist Society so that they would gain more respectability. So they called their name the League for Industrial Democracy, because they were already changing the Constitution from a constitutional republic to a democracy. So they wanted to make it sound more acceptable. And their motto became production for use, not for profit, which is pure socialism. In every socialist country there is, they have a state-owned or controlled business. And it's a monopoly. And it's only production for use by the citizens and never for profit by the owners. Because, see, under a socialist society, all businesses are controlled and totally owned by the government itself. There is no free enterprise. You and I cannot make a profit. So socialism had become a scare word to most of the public by 1905. From the years 1905 through 1955, the League for Industrial Democracy claimed as some of its members advisors, cooperators, and the recipients of honor awards. Such people, and some of you are going to recognize some of these names. They were nationally known personalities such as Ralph Bunche, George S. Counts, Clarence Darrow, Eugene V. Debs, John Dewey, and most people have heard of that name, Senator Paul H. Douglas, David Dubinsky, Senator Hubert H. Humphrey. I don't think there's anybody that hadn't heard of him. Max Lerner, Walter Lippmann, George Meany, Senator Wayne Morris, A.J. Musty, Reinhold Niebuhr, Harry A. Overstreet, Walter Reuther, Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of the President of the United States, which the Congress had to pass laws to keep him from becoming a dictator in the United States. And they limited the presidential term to 2 terms because he had already run for 3 terms, and people were re-electing him every single time. Others were William Shirer, Lincoln Steffens, James Wechsler, and hundreds more, but we won't go into those. But you'll notice every single one of these people were high officials in such fields as government, education, religion, law, labor, communications, the radio networks, and international diplomacy representing the United States in foreign governments. So all of these people were a part of the socialist apparatus who had infiltrated into our government to dismantle us and place us in a one-world socialist communist government. Norman Thomas, who ran 6 times as a candidate for the President of the United States on the Socialist Party ticket. Many of you may have heard his name or known of it before. I want to give a quote which he made. "The American people will never knowingly adopt socialism, but under the name of liberalism." Now never forget this, because when you hear of a liberal in Congress, you know that he's a socialist. You know that he's trying to work for the dismantling of our Constitution and merge us into a one-world socialist government. Under the name of liberalism, the American people will adopt every fragment of the socialist program until America will one day be a socialist nation without knowing how it happened. And the introduction, when I first started on this series, Dismantling America, I said everybody knows something's wrong, but they don't know what it is. They can't place their finger on it. This is exactly the problem. They are little by little introducing socialism and passing every single part of the platform of the Socialist Party, and we don't even know how it's taking place. It's called liberals in the Congress of the United States. Now, this was a socialist prediction. Now I want to give you a communist prediction. 3 months before Nikita Khrushchev visited the United States in 1959, this is what he said, and this was while he was the ruthless dictator of international communism. Quote, "We can't expect the American people to jump from capitalism or our constitutional republic, which guarantees that if you work hard, you can keep what you earned, to communism, which is total state control of everything, and there's no profit for anyone." Notice what he says. "But we can assist their elected leaders in giving them small doses of socialism until they awaken one day to find they have communism." And this is exactly what's been happening in the United States of America even since before the turn of the century. On April 24th, 1920, the Joint Legislative Committee investigating seditious activities filed in the Senate of the state of New York a 4-volume report. It's called the Lust Report. The general introduction of Volume 1 states, and I'll quote, "Those representing the socialist point of view are the Socialist Party of America, the Communist Party of America, the Communist Labor Party, and the Socialist Labor Party. A study of their platforms and official pronouncements shows that they do not differ fundamentally in their objectives. These objectives are the establishment of a cooperative commonwealth in place of the present form of government in the United States." So they just totally take over and eliminate free enterprise so that there is no profit motive. When there is not an incentive to produce, you have communism because you can't better yourself or your status in life. A second motive or objective was to overthrow of what they are pleased to call the capitalist system, namely the present system under which we live, and the substitution in its place of collective ownership, the government ownership, and the management of the means of production and distribution by the working class. So everyone produces, not for a profit though, but just to have your necessities. And when there is no profit motive, an incentive to produce, then no one wants to work. That's why alcoholism is becoming the number one problem in the Soviet countries and all their satellites. So how are they going to do it though? Well, we've already seen that they're going to introduce little by little legislation to change our Constitution to a socialist government. So centralization of power in Washington is the prime communist socialist objective. See, if they can eliminate 50 states having control of themselves and pool all power into one federal bureaucracy, all they have to do is take over one location, the federal government. Then they'll have control of the other 50 states. So that's exactly what they're doing. So if the communist socialists can destroy states' rights, which they've been working on for 50 years, as effective units of government, then they can centralize all power in Washington. They only have the one battle to win, not 50 separate battles. So let's take a look at the 10th Amendment to the Constitution and see what it says. It states, and I quote, that the powers not yet delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. Nowhere in the Constitution does it give the federal government any power whatsoever to control our education, health, welfare, labor, dams and public or other power projects, agriculture, unemployment, and housing. These are just a few of them. There is nowhere in the Constitution that gives the federal government that power, and yet they have it today, illegally. That's how the socialist communists are controlling every facet of society. So according to the Constitution, the regulation of all these areas remain within the jurisdiction of the states, or to you and I as individual citizens. But remember the prediction of the socialists and the communists, that they would pass legislation to socialize America without us knowing how it has actually happened. So now you can know every time there is an election, no matter who is elected president, Republican or Democrat, the same programs towards socialism continues. Because it's the liberals that are in Congress and the non-elected liberals who are called bureaucrats who are there, have seniority, they can't be fired, and they're there continually passing more legislation, or they write it up and hand it to the congressman to introduce it into Congress. So Ronald Reagan was the most conservative president to take office in over 60 years, and he had a 76% consensus of the voting public. And yet, he can't get hardly any of his platform that he ran on passed because of the majority in the House and in the Senate are socialist communists using the term liberal to hide their true goals and purposes. But when federal funds are used to support such things as education, health, welfare, labor, dams, public power projects, such as the Tennessee Valley Authority, known as the TVA, support agriculture, unemployment, housing, and so on, the federal government uses control over these areas by the power that they've been given. All because of one particular court decision in 1942. And the socialist, liberal, communists are the ones who brought up this particular court. They brought it into court to get a decision favoring them. And ever since then, they have taken over state rights. And that decision came, it was Wickard versus Filburn in 1942. And the decision included this following statement. It is hardly a lack of due process for government to regulate that which it subsidizes. So the federal government is trying to pass laws to subsidize every facet of society. If they subsidize agriculture, they can control it. They can regulate it. If they subsidize state housing projects for the elderly, then they can control it. If they come in and subsidize every police department but one in the United States of America, they control them. So what it amounts to is they have a federal police department. And they do. Every single one of them but one. And that one police department rejected federal aid. And they're the only one that's totally independent and don't have to go by federal guidelines. So each new federal law that's passed by Congress, which invades the rights of the individual states, further strengthens the control of the federal government over citizens of each state. An example of the socialist plan to destroy the rights of the individual states is that the Kennedy administration proposed the establishment of a new Department on Urban Affairs. And what happened? They created a new cabinet post. And now this person is added as one of the presidential advisors and so on. And now they have strengthened control by bypassing the state, and they deal directly with each individual city. So this is how they gain control, by bypassing the state legislatures, and they gain control of individual cities, individual police departments. And it's already happened. And this is totally against the Constitution of the United States. But in his speech in 1957 before the National Convention of the American Legion, J. Edgar Hoover, who was then director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, warned, and I want to quote him directly, to dismiss lightly the existence of the subversive threat in the United States is to deliberately commit national suicide. In some quarters, we are doing exactly that. I've actually had people writing in to me and saying, you've got to be crazy to think there is an international conspiracy to take over the world. How could anybody conspire to take over 3 to 4 billion people? And yet, all the evidence is there. Because everything I'll state to you, I'll have documentation to absolutely prove it. The July 30th, 1953 report of the Jenner Committee is probably the most comprehensive report of the congressional investigation ever undertaken by the Internal Security Subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee of the United States Senate. They were investigating seditious activities, those who are trying to overthrow the United States government and merge us into a one-world socialist communist government. And I'll give you the conclusions of that committee. Number one, the Soviet International Organization has carried on a successful and important penetration of the United States government, and this penetration has not been fully exposed. And since 1962, there has been no further exposure of the Soviets within our government. They now have everything as classified information. It's censored, and the public cannot gain access to it anymore since 1962. That's why they can send such men as Kissinger, who was the number one security risk when he entered the United States in 1958. The number one security risk in the United States, and he became the most powerful leader in government. And then when Nixon was forced to resign, Henry Kissinger was given a vote of confidence by the Senate and House of Representatives, and not one person said that they did not trust him. And yet he was the number one security risk in the United States. And yet he was the most powerful man. And then Carter brought in Zbigniew Brzezinski, who wrote a book called Conflict, or Between the Two Ages, and also the technological age, or technotronic age. And he stated very clearly that he's a Marxist, and that the United States Constitution had to be changed by the year of 1989, the 200th year of its anniversary, and yet he was the number one power under Jimmy Carter. And yet the American public doesn't know this, because everything is now censored and declared as classified. But who is classifying it? The very same liberal, social, communists who have infiltrated and control our government. So they're just not allowing us to understand. But now a second thing that this Jenner Committee came up with. They said the penetration of these socialist communists has extended from the lower ranks to top-level policy and operating positions in our government. And you can't get higher than the Secretary of State or the top security advisor like Brzezinski was, or even the top man called President of the United States. A third conclusion they came to: the agents of this communist penetration have operated in accordance with a distinct design fashioned by their Soviet superiors. Number 4, members of this conspiracy, they used the word conspiracy, helped to get each other into government, helped each other to rise in government, and once they were in government, protected each other from exposure. That's why we can't get rid of them. Number 5, in general, the communists who infiltrated our government work behind the scenes. Notice how they operate. Never out in the public, never openly, so that you and I can brand them as a traitor to this country. They worked behind the scenes guiding research and preparing memoranda on which basic American policies were set, writing speeches for cabinet members, influencing congressional investigations, drafting laws which dismantle the Constitution and take away our freedoms and allow the government to control us. All right? They manipulated administrative reorganizations, always serving the interest of their Soviet superiors. Number 6, policies and programs laid down by members of the Soviet conspiracy are still in effect within our government. That was the conclusion they came to, and constitute a continuing hazard to the national security of the United States. This is why everybody knows something's wrong, but they can't place a finger on it. Because these men work behind the scenes, they draft the laws, present them to congressmen. The first thing they do is they get something on them so they can blackmail them. They get something on them. Then when you blackmail somebody, either you present this as a law before Congress, or else we'll expose your sins to the whole public. So this is exactly how they operate. But that's not all. So I want to look at the congressional record of the United States, and any person can go to Washington and look this up and see it with their own eyes. This was found in the congressional record. It was uncovered by W. Cleon Skousen for the Federal Bureau of Investigation while he was serving as the assistant to J. Edgar Hoover. This was a planned destruction of the United States in order to merge it into a one-world socialist communist system. Look at this. And you can look at these points which he uncovered, and you can see them happening all around you. And some of them are so specific, such as the giveaway of the Panama Canal, that there can be no doubt that exactly the program they've laid down is working within our borders. And they're using this to dismantle us and merge us into this one-world beast system prophesied in Revelation 13. Number 1, they were to convince the United States to accept coexistence. See, coexistence, because of nuclear weaponry, will destroy the whole world, as an alternative to atomic war. This gives them free movement by the threat of nuclear annihilation. Since we won't fight back, this gives them free movement to spread international socialism and communism. Number 2, convince the United States to capitulate or to give in preference to engaging in atomic war. So put such fear into us that we will give in and say we have to merge into this one world government rather than take a chance on total annihilation of all human beings. Number 3, develop the illusion that total disarmament by the United States would be a demonstration of moral strength. So if we give in, then it is moral strength on our part. But see, they don't have the moral strength we do, so they will be the victors and we'll be the losers. So they're giving us an illusion that it's really morally strengthening to us to give in and merge into their system. Number 4, and you'll recognize this one very easily, permit free trade between all nations, regardless of whether items could be used for war. And what is happening today? We have a total invasion of foreign goods in our country that's totally undermining our industrial capacity to produce. And that's why we have 11% unemployment. And it is not going down, but it's going up. And they try to fool us into thinking there is a recovery, but it is not a recovery going on. Number 5, extension of long-term loans to Russia and Soviet satellites. But why? Why give long-term loans from our bankers to communist countries? Because they know that they're going to merge us into a one-world socialist government and they'll not have to repay the loans. So it makes sense. Use our money to build their weaponry, and then they'll never have to repay it anyway. So what risk are they taking by accepting our money? None whatsoever. And Nikita Khrushchev stated that they would bury us. So this is a part of their program. And number 6 was to provide foreign aid to all nations, thus draining the wealth of our nation. And in 1946, we passed the Foreign Aid Act. And now we have given enough foreign aid to 196 nations in the last, 37 years? That we could have balance, or it was enough to cover our national budget for 10 years. We would have no national debt whatsoever if we had not given one dime of foreign aid. And a third of all foreign aid went directly to communist countries. And this is how they're draining the wealth. Taking our money supply, going overseas, and spreading our dollars all over. And remember, it used to be backed by gold and silver. So these foreign countries, upon demand, could demand the gold and silver. And so now Fort Knox has no money, no gold or no silver in it whatsoever. We're broke. And that's exactly what they planned for. Number 7, and you'll see that this is already a reality, and yet this was discovered way back. Grant recognition of Red China with admission to the United Nations. It's just happened within the last 4 or 5 years. Nixon saw to it, and Jimmy Carter saw to it that Red China was acknowledged, and our ally sitting off the coast, Taiwan, was just snubbed. And they were put out of the United Nations, and a socialist communist country, Red China, was put into that world organization. Number 8, set up East and West Germany as separate states after World War II. And did it happen? Sure it did. It happened. Number 9, prolong the conferences to ban atomic tests because the United States has agreed to suspend tests as long as negotiations are in progress. And that gave years of opportunity for the communists to advance militarily because they had total access to our patent office. See, you and I in this country can go in and look into the patent office, but we can't reproduce the same thing that someone else is reproducing because they have a patent until a certain number of years has gone by. But the Soviets can come in, take the same patent, and since they're in a foreign country, they can reproduce anything. And so they've taken the lead and militarily from the United States by prolonging these conferences to ban atomic tests. Number 10, allow all Soviet satellites representation in the United Nations. Therefore, it would become a socialist communist organization and the future one world government organization. Number 11, promote the United Nations as the only hope for mankind. Have you heard that before? That it's our last chance? This was discovered before the United Nations was ever set up. If its charter is rewritten, demand that it be set up as a one-world government with its own independent armed forces. And that's exactly what has already taken place. Number 12, resist any attempt to outlaw the Communist Party. And that has taken place. The Communist Party is not outlawed in this country. You can belong to it freely. Number 13, and get this one, do away with all loyalty oaths. Because, you see, every person that is elected by the people have to swear and take a loyalty oath that they will not discredit the Constitution of the United States. They'll not undermine it, but they'll be loyal and uphold it to protect you and I as the citizens from a tyrannical government. So if you do away with all loyalty oaths, then you can't be convicted of perjury, a lying, when you're not upholding the Constitution. Number 14, continue to give Russia access to the U.S. Patent Office. And they've done it. Number 15, capture one or both of the political parties in the United States. So now you can understand, no matter which one comes into office, they continue with the socialist program because they've captured both of them. Number 16, use technical decisions in the courts to weaken basic American institutions by claiming their activities violate civil rights. And what happens with Bob Jones University just this week? Bob Jones University, which does have integration, has now been expelled from their tax-exempt status because they wouldn't allow interracial dating. See, they brought them to court several years back. And so Bob Jones said, okay, we'll allow any nationality to come to our school. Therefore, they could continue to be tax-exempt. But that wasn't good enough, see, because the government wants to destroy our basic institutions, Christian institutions. So now it has to be, okay, now you allow any type of person from anywhere in the world to come into this institution. That's fine. But now you've gotten around our lawsuit, so now we've got to come at you from another angle. We're going to destroy this institution. So now it's only because they won't allow interracial dating and therefore marriages. So now their tax-exempt status has been taken away. But that's just an excuse. They use every excuse possible in order to destroy every Christian institution and weaken our society. If it's not one thing, it's another. And you can look and you can see some of the things you say, that's so ridiculous it don't even make sense. Well, it doesn't to us, but it does to those who want to undermine our Constitution. Number 17, get control of schools. Now, how did they do it? Number 1, they got control of schools by giving financial aid and bypassing the state legislatures. Therefore, if you give assistance, remember the Wickard Supreme Court decision? They said whatever the government subsidizes, it can control. Therefore, you give federal aid to all school boards all over in every state. Therefore, you can control those schools. So now it's no longer the public schools, which you and I control. It's a federal government school. So they use these federal schools to promote socialism and current communist propaganda, our one world government. And when I took my son to college, when he entered as a freshman, and I was telling him all this, the first thing we noticed when we got a list of classes, here it was, a history course on one worldism. And he took it just for the fun of it to see what it was like. And sure enough, it's nothing but a socialist communist propaganda preaching to our young people one worldism. So they needed to get control of teachers' associations also, and they have. The National Education Association is the largest in the country, and it is a socialist communist front organization. And another way they wanted to subvert the United States was to gain control of all student newspapers in colleges. And they've done that, practically 100%. Number 19, use student riots, which they did back in the 60s, to ferment public protest against programs and organizations which are under communist attack. And where were some of these protests starting? Yale, which was a, quote, Christian institution. Harvard, Columbia. The intellectual centers which had Christian institutions. And then they spread to the other state universities. Number 20 was to infiltrate the press for a total takeover. Therefore, they could give only the propaganda and only the news and disseminate the news they wanted us to have as a public. Number 21, gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures. And I'll be presenting other information on that to show that they absolutely control it through the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission. Every key spot in every newspaper, radio, that's NBC, CBS, and ABC today, including the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. That's why I don't get it anymore. The Globe Democrat is an independent paper, and they shoot straight. But you notice it's only about 1/4 to 1/5 the size of the Post-Dispatch. Because, see, those people who are behind this world government also control large industry, and they don't give advertising to anyone who will expose them. So that's why they're such a small paper, because of the lack of advertising revenue. Number 22, continue discrediting American culture by degrading all forms of artistic expression. In other words, bring in nudity, nude movies, books, perverted art. And how many different books and magazines are there now that show total nudity? And it's after one thing, to demoralize the country so that we'll become unmoral and do away with the Ten Commandments. Number 23 was to control art critics and directors of art museums. That way, in other words, I want to give a direct quote. Our plan is to promote ugliness, repulsive and meaningless art. And that's what we've had since the 1960s. Eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship. Have you heard that before? Sure you have. I have too. And a violation of free speech and free press. They've accomplished this and therefore allowed a deluge of magazines, over 100 of them, totally nude, perverted magazines, to break down a Christian morality. Number 25, break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV, and now cable TV, so that you can have anything you want to see. And even in Europe, they've already accomplished this. They have even X and triple X rated movies in the middle of the night, and people go to bed early, right after they come in from work, set their alarm and get up in the middle of the night and watch this type thing. And this is what's coming in the United States too, because these people control it. They want to break down your morality so that you'll not be a Christian anymore. And then they can have their way with you. Number 26, present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as normal, healthy alternative lifestyles. And isn't this what's gone on in the United States? Sure it has. We all can recognize it. Number 27, infiltrate the churches. And this was one of their major objectives. And replaced revealed religion, the Ten Commandments of God, as the only moral standard, with social religion. Discredit the Bible as a crutch of which people lean upon, and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a religious crutch. Just from the things that I've stated today, can't you see it all around you? It's happening everywhere, and you can see it once you know where the source is coming from, and you can see it, and it just makes so much sense. Number 28, think about this one. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in schools. Do I have to say anything? It's done. Retta Trescott was fired because of religious expression in school as a teacher, and others have been fired also. Number 29, discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate and out of step. And that's exactly what Zygmunt Brzezinski stated in his book, Between the Two Ages and the Technotronic Age. It's outdated, and we have to totally replace the Constitution with a Marxist style of government by the year of 1989, the 200th anniversary of the Constitution. Number 30, discredit the American Founding Fathers. Present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man. Now, why would you do that? Because under our free society in which we can produce wealth for ourselves, the harder we work, the more that we can produce, and our constitutional republic guarantees we can keep it. And that's what our founding fathers did. Okay, but then if those socialist communists who want to destroy our form of government can make them look bad, then we'll want to get rid of the Constitution that allowed them to become wealthy because they produced. So that's exactly what they've tried to do. Number 31, belittle all forms of American culture and discourage the teaching of American history. Because if we understand American history and the greatness of this country, we'll not accept socialism in any form. Number 32, support all socialist movement to give centralized control over any part of the culture. Education, social agencies such as housing authority, welfare programs, mental health clinics, and all this has already been done. And that has just strengthened their position as total control over the people. Number 33, eliminate all laws or procedures which interfere with the operation of the communist apparatus. They've done it. They've dismantled the CIA and the FBI to where it's nothing but it can just slap you on the back of the hand with a wet noodle. That's about all. They can't do anything to stop the communist apparatus. Number 34, discredit and eventually dismantle the FBI. Number 35, eliminate the House Committee on Un-American Activities, which has been done since 1962. Number 36, infiltrate and gain control of more labor unions in order to destroy American business. And now we can understand what's going on. They are in control. They push prices up so high that no one can afford products. Then you have to demand more wages to keep up with it. So it's inflation. And pretty soon, the dollar, which is not backed by gold or silver and has no value anymore, becomes worthless, just like Germany after World War II, where it took, 5 to 10 billion marks, a whole basket full of money just to buy one loaf of bread. That's exactly what's happening. Number 37, infiltrate and gain control of business. Create a monopoly in the marketplace with them in control. And I have an article from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, 10 years old, which states very clearly that large international bankers control a vast majority of the big business in this country under secret names. And I'm going to print that one of these days. Number 38, transfer some of the powers of arrest from the police to social agencies. Treat all behavior problems as psychiatric disorders. And now you understand why criminals, murderers, and rapists are turned loose on the American people by the courts. Number 39, dominate the psychiatric profession and use mental health laws as a means of gaining coercive control over those who oppose communist goals. One of our senators from the state of Missouri has gone to psychiatrists after he went for one solid year he started voting everything social. I wonder why. Could it be that that person he went to now has the goods on him and is using blackmail, and he has to vote for socialism or they'll destroy him politically? That's exactly what they use this information for. Number 40, discredit the family as an institution. Encourage promiscuity, outside sexual relationships, not just with one man and one woman, and promote easy divorce for any reason. Number 41, emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents. Attribute prejudices and mental blocks to suppressive influence of parents. And that has happened, and it is happening. That's why they actually had they were trying to pass a law in the legislature of the United States to create day schools, government-sponsored, so all children in kindergarten could be taken away, or even down to age 2, could be placed in these day schools and trained for a one-world system. But fortunately, it was vetoed and it didn't pass. Number 42, create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of the American tradition, that students and special interest groups should rise up and use united force to solve all of our problems. And that's why we had the riots of the 60s. Number 43, and we're nearly through with this section, overthrow all colonial governments before native populations are ready for self-government. And that's exactly what's happened when the British Empire has been dismantled, and they would allow a country, they would set a certain target date when they would have free elections. Well, the Marxist communists would overthrow that government before they could actually be ready to govern themselves. Number 44, internationalize the Panama Canal. Has it been done? Sure it has. And we don't own it anymore. And the reason for it is because Panama, which is a pro-Marxist country or socialist country, owes tremendous debts to the international bankers. In order for them to have the revenue to pay back their debt, they had to have control of the Panama Canal and receive the revenues instead of us. And so we gave it to them. And it's kind of absurd, really, when you stop to think that they only have the population of a fourth of the state of New Jersey in Panama. And we can't even defeat militarily that little tiny Panama. And that was the excuse that our lawmakers used. We would have to go to war with Panama in order to keep it because they're pro-Marxist. That's kind of ridiculous. Probably this room full of people with some arms could whip Panama. 45. Repeal the Connolly Reservation so that the United States cannot prevent the World Court from seizing jurisdiction over domestic, that's internal United States problems. In other words, give the World Court jurisdiction over our nation and individuals alike. And that's what they're trying to get done in Congress right now. Have you ever heard, well, I've mentioned it here, but do you remember there's a convention that's been brought up since 1948, the Genocide Convention. And I've mentioned it, where if that is passed by the Congress of the United States, if any one of us make any accusation or statement publicly against someone from another race, creed, or political belief, we can be tried in the world court. And if convicted, we'll never be seen again because we'll be sent off to imprisonment in a foreign country. All of these things, and you can see them, they're happening all around us. And so there is a secret organization that's working behind the scenes to dismantle the United States and merge it into that one world beast system prophesied in Revelation chapter 13 to fight Jesus Christ when he returns. But in order to destroy the prestige and military power of the United States, the Kremlin promotes the following policies. Number 1, cultural exchanges. Khrushchev's report of February 1956 lists cultural exchanges and business exchanges as one of those developments which can bring about a growing weakness of the United States and advance world socialism. Judge Robert Morris, who spent over 19 years intensively studying the communist conspiracy, I want to quote what he says, in the past years of exchange, this is cultural exchanges, secret police have passed as farmers, ice skaters, clergymen, and scientists for the purpose of conducting espionage operations in this country. The policy of continuing cultural exchanges with the Soviet Union has the support of every liberal in Congress. Now remember, they're secretly socialists. They may not call themselves communists, Because the difference in a socialist and communist is a socialist wants to pass legislation to socialize the country. Communist wants to violently overthrow it by arms. But the same program is the end result. The government controls everything. So we can begin to see that there is a program for dismantling the United States of America. And next time we'll take it up in our continuing exposure of the plan to dismantle the United States and merge it into a one-world government prophesied in Revelation chapter 13. One last-minute piece of information since our May 14th first delivery of side A of this cassette tape is that Citibank has backed down on their requirement of an instant transfer of funds for everyone with less than $5,000 in their joint bank accounts. They've decided to let their customers go ahead and conduct business across the counter with a teller. But this is only for a period of time until they have gained acceptance. So this is sort of a victory in putting off the inevitable of total electronic transfer of funds. But it is coming. It's only a setback for those who are pushing for this electronic transfer of funds at this time.